perhaps as an intro to selling film. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll actually just begin by talking about, maybe if you could talk about how you guys know each other, and as well how you collaborated, and maybe the division of labor on how this worked.
Well, we met through mutual friends in New York, and we actually met in Sheffield Documentary Film Festival, and then basically I started to make the film in around March last year, and then Max happened to be in Moscow in the summer on other business as the trial was starting, and we sort of met up and decided that, well, certainly it would be great to kind of collaborate on this film, and so we did. So it was a kind of, in a way, a lucky circumstance that we were both sort of there at the same time, and then I mean, I guess in terms of how we work together, I mean, Max is obviously a Muscovite, so he has great rapport with our contributors, who were quite suspicious. I mean, Masha's mother in particular wasn't talking to any press. She'd had quite a hard time in the press, and they'd been pursuing her and sort of giving her a hard time. So it took nice Max to kind of persuade her that it was a good idea to contribute to the film, which was a crucial thing. Mm-hmm. And then I guess we just started to film. I mean, by the time we were working together with the trial was the main focus of what we were filming, essentially, with contributions from the family, and again, Max managed to kind of negotiate access to the trial footage, which is a significant part of the film, and then we flew back to New York and spent 8 weeks cutting the film for Sundance, which was a trial, because I mean, we luckily got into Sundance, which is great, but then you've got the responsibility of delivering a decent film, which we just about did, with days to spare, you know. So that was quite. So we were really cutting them together and working through the material. And I guess, again, I think it's been a great collaboration because we have very similar political views and aesthetic views, and had the same ambition for the film very much.
In terms of what can I say? I mean, I think that the film changed a bit because for a long time, I mean, one of the interesting things about making it is that it was a bit unpredictable in terms of what the material would be. And so once we found this trial footage, in a way, from the beginning, you do have the sense that the most interesting aspect of it are the three characters themselves, but we didn't know what kind of access, because you couldn't access them in prison, obviously, and whether there was enough material to make it about them without it really forcing it and being shoehorned into it. So in a way, the film started out as being a little bit more about the contextual situation in Russia surrounding the trial, but then, like I said, the Russian equivalent of Reuters were, not only did they film the trial, but when in general, being in Moscow at that time, it was such a crazy time, and there was just this energy of radicalization in the air. That whole year, in a way, and maybe the Pussy Riot trial was a great last burst of it, and to try to capture that. And in a way, I think that the film started out being a little bit more about that context, but once we found out that we could make the film about the three women and make it their story and show how they got to where they were, that became really important. And and being inside the courtroom, it was an amazing trial to observe. I mean, certain things that weren't filmed were incredibly interesting, like testimonies of the witnesses, but what the women themselves did with the trial and how they approached it, and even at a dramatic level, what their conflict was, which was, they did this thing that had this incredible resonance and this incredible controversy surrounding it. And they, on the one hand, didn't really mean to offend all the people that they offended, but yet at the same time, they wanted to also stand up for their principles, for their belief that they should have the right to do what they did. And I think that tension was just so palpable in their behavior. And also, once we found out that there were all this footage of them interacting before the trial and speaking to one another, we were we realized that you could actually make a film that would be the definitive Pussy Riot film, because it would be about the three.
I mean, they are performance artists, and they turn the trial into an extension of that performance. Really, I mean, the thing, and that's what the film, in a way, I think is a great opportunity to sort of put those two things together and show that. I mean, historically, it was the act, and then the arrest, and then the trial, and then the verdict. All that is really part of the piece, you know. I mean, not that they necessarily deliberately set out to do that, but once that was the situation, they turn it into that. And their complete control over everything that's happening, even now, is really quite remarkable. So in a way, they are manipulating the whole event still, because there is a sense in which they could have possibly been more apologetic, more, you know, and they would have got a lesser sentence. I mean, they could have let them out after their 6 months that had been detained after the trial. That would have made sense.
And that would have sufficed for all the people that
everybody would have been happy with that. But no, they go, well, I mean, they do say, look, if we've offended anybody, we're sorry, but we don't apologise for what we've done, because what we've done is what we do. We're oppositionist artists, and you know, and we do it again, you know. So and they still really say that, and they're still very much you know, in opposition. I mean, Nadia had this hearing 2 days ago.
Yes.
And I mean, she's in a way as politically defiant as ever. I mean,
well, there's always a sort of sense of fortuitous chance that comes up in documentary, and it seems like this is the gold mine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We were very lucky. I think we deserved to be lucky because our intentions were good. At the same time, you know, it could have been a very different film had we not had this material. You know, I mean, we obviously would have found another way, but you know, the fact it does give them such voice in the film is really fantastic.
And you know what else? I've also realized that another way in which we were very lucky with the material is that the material dictated a bit that the film would be structured as a procedural, like as a trial. And what that does, especially when you're dealing with a story that's so sensational, is kind of take you out and give you this sort of regularity and allow you to step back a little bit. And for stories such as this, it's incredibly helpful to do that, because there's so many. At the time as it's happening, everyone has sort of a dog in the fight, and everyone is trying to claim the story and twist it for their own purposes and all these things. And once you have this regular kind of structure, these things happen. And it's the same reason why novelists a lot of times are attracted to crimes, because it gives you a structure for the story, and it almost becomes a MacGuffin in a way, because you have that, and then you can tack on all these other things that you actually want to explore in a film, which, you know, for us it's performance art, it's the role of art in society in general, religious fundamentalism, you know, freedom of expression, all these things. But to have a clear skeleton to structure it was very helpful. And
no, you both have backgrounds in producing as well, but this is the debut feature for you both. Was it almost the speed of how this was transpiring? Was that an impetus to direct, or did you set out knowing that this was something that you wanted?
I've directed other films before.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the last 25 years making films about art and where art intersects with politics in particular, and this is just the ultimate story of that. So I just felt, you know, I just wanted to get on with it and try and see if we could tell this story. You know, and obviously, you know, one didn't predict exactly how big it would go. You know, they could have let them off after the first bail hearing, and you know, it would have been obviously a lesser story. So the fact it did go all the way and is still going all the way, and they're now probably the most impactful and famous piece of performance art in history, is obviously, again, part of our fortune in terms of the film, but also, you know, I say a golden opportunity to make a film that really analyses that relationship.
Yeah, and I think that for me especially, growing up in similar times and being into the same kind of rock and roll and avant-garde art, a lot of the same things that people are coming out of it, was once being there at the trial and you're getting to learn this, it was this kind of immediate sense of kinship with them, which was incredible, because you rarely do get to make films about people that are so similar. In a way, it's very difficult to do that, but you know, both Mike and I are kind of lefties, and in a way, usually you have to kind of be talking about your subject, and then you sneak in a little jab about your own politics. You get to piggyback on whatever story is, whereas here, you really get to, they say it all themselves. And, and for us, that was one of the things also about the film, is to show them, first of all, to show that they're, in a way, not to make them martyrs, but to show that they're, politically very radical and very aware of what they're doing and taking these chances, and they're incredibly courageous for that, and also to present them as performance artists much more. I think that has been one of many misrepresentations about them, is to show them as a band, and there's good reasons for it, because it is hard. It's a little bit brainy to explain that they're a performance art group in the guise of a band for all these things, but it is such an important difference, and I think that a lot of people that dismiss them because they don't like punk rock, but they don't, they feel like that, okay, that you're calling the songs that they perform performance art, which isn't quite. It's the idea of how they perform and where they perform, and this idea of direct action and spontaneous guerrilla performances. Right. That's so significant.
I mean, I think it's a classic case that people project onto them their own interpretation, and so to Max and I, we are, Marxist, feminist, oppositionist people, and clearly we identify with them as that. Others see them as champions of freedom of speech. Others see them as kind of anti-Putinist, anti-Russian. So there's been the West, in a way, has embraced them as this kind of Putin evil, Pussy Riot good, and obviously the religious see them as demonic blasphemers. So in a way, because in a way their image is so simple, and their name is just so blatant. People instantly sort of form an opinion, I think, and attach their own. I mean, I would say we're guilty of that too. I think they are what I've said they are, but
people are very proprietary about it. Because they love, usually, and a lot of times during screenings, there'll be someone that's read like 3 or 4 articles about Pussy Riot, and they love to come up and to tell you about it. Huh?
Yeah. But the fact the left and right can identify, say in America or here, those people that just see them as anti-Putinist good, but actually they wouldn't agree with their politics by a long way.
Well, the Slavoj Žižek wrote in, I'm going to quote from him here, The True Blasphemy. He said that we need to make sure that we don't pay, or that Pussy Riot doesn't pay in their flesh the price for becoming a global symbol. And I thought that in this context, this film takes on an interesting tone as well.
Yeah, it's
go ahead.
No, as I say, it is amazing what they inspire and what they stir up. I mean, it is. I think it is because it is so simple, really. It is a tabula rasa on which people project what they wish, and you could say they're victims and paying with their flesh for that, but at the end of the day, it's also what they want, They wouldn't consider themselves martyrs.
Yeah, and actually Žižek had another, I think he just wrote a letter to Nadia, and one of the things that he said, and I think it is very true, if you look at the way that the story has continued to live, is that once people did start digging a little bit deeper and realizing their background and their politics and all these things, they became a lot more difficult to swallow and to chew on. And what Žižek wrote to Nadia has been that because in a way their anti-capitalist tendencies have become more known, people become much more uncomfortable in that. And for us, that's in terms of putting their story in a historical perspective. There is this, if history is once tragedy, then farce, and this is definitely the sort of farcical,
bit of it,
gender-inverted version of the Russian Revolution. So it's a sort of, it is. We've said that it's a story of a foiled feminist revolution, in a way, and it is very much, and that's what they are, and they're
stalled, perhaps, if not failed.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that. I'd heard another interview where you said it. Do you believe it's still foiled, or has it?
I think so. I don't think that. It didn't come to pass. What they were advocating, in a way, it didn't come to pass. I think that they've had tremendous influence, and in a way that they've, even in reappropriating the word pussy, but also in just making people think about these things. And there's this kind of rebirth of, in Russia, what's interesting is that you really didn't have what left-wing politics since 1991. because basically there's been a lot of really conservative movements and sort of communists as well as religious people, all these things. And then in a way, Putin and people like that, it's this old corporate structure, but they're sort of somewhat to the left. And there has been these small pro-Western liberals, but what's happened is that because the people that were involved with that were so responsible for completely destroying the Russian economy and destroying everything in the country, for everyone else who really suffered so much during the 90s, these people are really tainted with essentially social liberalism is tainted and tarred with a brush of economic neoliberalism, which is what happened in the 90s. And it's really refreshing, especially for me, to see this new wave of people that are essentially leftist politically, but also aren't just advocating kind of a hyper Western capitalism.
I mean, I think in a way, after there is before and after Pussy Riot. I think I actually think the significance of the story will grow in time. I think, as Max has said, what they've done is articulate a position that now millions of young Russians, if they maybe and certainly probably don't agree with, but the question's been raised, and the question of gender equality and gay rights and just the general patriarchal nature of the society and the misogynistic attitudes that prevail, people will now feel it legitimate to question, a younger generation I'm talking. And I think that will have a very subtle effect, in time. I mean, clearly, the opposition are divided, they've been largely crushed. The main opposition leaders are either in prison or facing charges, or Pussy Riot have been put away. So in terms of this moment last year where there seemed to be a rise of oppositionist politics, that has been quelled for the moment. But I think it's a process, and this is a really huge moment in that process. I think. And that's why the story has such resonance. I mean, even Pussy Riot, the women themselves are kind of pretty startled and staggered about how big a response there has been to their story. I mean, they're delighted, but also kind of, they had no idea what kind of cultural bomb it would be, and I think that will continue. I mean, and let's see what happens upon the release. I mean, we don't know. There'll be a second wave of the revolution when they come out. Who knows?
Right. Well, there's usually, or I find sometimes there's a tension in documentary when it comes to issues-based ones as well, of moving beyond the theater to the street or something like that. And I was wondering did you have that in mind at all, of what you hope that this might inspire in Western audiences, because that's where it's getting played? Well,
I mean, I think that with Western audiences, it was to give a clearer sense of the story, and it was so often presented as, as this story about a punk band that went and sung an anti-Putin song, and then were arrested for it, which is just kind of nonsense. And again, and so it was to clear that up and to actually present their position in a real way, and to make Western audiences also grapple with them. And I think that a lot of people in the West are very uncomfortable with them, and that's good, and it's important, and that's a positive thing. And again, we're not big on social issues and kind of promoting them, but to be honest in representing them, I think is incredibly important. And in a way, that's the most politically radical thing you could do with them. There was a 60 Minutes piece about them, and reading the comments, it was so interesting because most of them were, and granted you're dealing with sort of a middle America kind of more conservative audience, but most of the comments were very negative, and a lot of them were calling for them that they should have been arrested for assault, for attacking police officers when they do this action where they French kiss female police officers in public. So, I think that it's, again, as artists, they're radical and they inspire this kind of reflection. And for us, the goal was to make a film that does something similar. That you don't walk away with this sort of happy-go-lucky feeling that, I've empathized with these women, good for me, And
I think importantly to answer your question about the response on the street. I mean, the film is about them, but it's also about us, of course, and it's about the limits of freedom that we experience in our own societies, and indeed, obviously, the parallel with the Occupy movement in America and Britain, where these social revolutionaries, if you call them that, were tolerated for a while, and then the state decides this far and no further, and then the crackdown is severe, complete, and quite violent and total. I mean, I'm not saying that movement can't come back, but it certainly learnt a huge lesson about how far you can push things, and I think it's exactly the same experience with Pussy Riot. They were tolerated, and suddenly they crossed a line and the state goes, right, that's it.
And rather than standing up for secular principles, the state kind of like, okay.
Exactly. I mean, it suddenly turned it literally into a kind of medieval witch hunt, you know. And if you look at I think interestingly, you know, there were protests in New York for Pussy Riot where under archaic laws about
bank
robbery law, where you're not allowed to have more than 3 people can't gather in public with their faces covered. You know, actually, filmmakers Esther Robinson and a few others were arrested under this law. In France,
I think there's 50 people in New York, 52, I believe.
In France, there were arrests for Pussy Riot protests under the burqa law, where you're not allowed to have your face covered in public. In Germany, there were arrests where there's a law that it's illegal to disrupt a religious service, you know, for good reason. I mean, that's probably a reasonable law given, you know, that country's history. But in this context, so it's very interesting to see, you know, as I say, what role we have, and I think a good film should not be about its subject; it should be about its audience, essentially, and it is about us, and I hope people do reflect on, you know, the equivalent of lack of freedom that we experience in our own societies, which I think has grown enormously in the last 10, 15 years. So.
And also, I think that one of the things we realize is, in addition to that, in addition to all the politics, it's just kind of a tremendous, epic, downright Greek story. I mean, you know, when you step aside and kind of people right now know the story a little bit, but imagining 5 years from now, I mean, the events that happened are so incredible. I mean, in the literal sense of the word, that this could happen, that these young women could put on these stockings on their head, and then all of a sudden 100,000 religious people could come out and protest against them. They would take, you know, it is this, and also just what happens to them and their personal dramas as they go through with this. I think it's just, at just a purely humanistic level, it's such an incredibly captivating and enjoyable story to watch. I mean, and that's not to diminish or dismiss any of the political dimensions, but it's rare to have that.
I mean, there's so many things that lead to that. I mean, you know, cometh the hour, cometh the women, you know, and these 3 women, I mean, the fact there are 3 of them, there could have been 8 of them, or 1 of them, or the dynamic of the trio, and they're very different characters, and they're very, you know, compelling nature. I mean, all this is a kind of perfect storm, if you like, you know, and that's why this moment, I mean, it is, I think Max is right, it is ultimately down to their personal qualities and this human story that is you know, quite remarkable. Yeah.
And in general, I think I believe strongly that the ability in documentary to be sort of humanistic in a certain way is the best way to both deepen and sort of trump very simple ideological explanations of things. And I think at once, you know, for us, once you examine how each of the 3 of them came to, let's say, to be in Pussy Riot, to be radicalized, essentially, and the different channels that took, that really, you know, pushes away a lot of the sort of the simplistic explanations. And you can do that, I think, very strongly by just delving into character. And I think that that's...
Oh, I wanted to jump back. I'm glad you brought up Occupy Wall Street as well, because this also comes at a moment when the idea of digital revolution is sort of the new form of this. You know, it's the revolution won't be televised; it'll be live, but now it's going to be viral, like this.
Yep.
And you touch on that as well in the film at the beginning with using Twitter. Yeah, the tweets and Twitter handles come up on the screen. So I wanted to talk about, maybe if you could.
Well, you know, I mean, one of the things that we're so lucky about was that they're essentially media performance artists, because what their art product is at the end of the day is that, you know, they go to places where they show up with maybe a boombox and they'll jump around and videotape themselves, not really performing, and then the next day they'll upload a video with music to their live journal page, and that becomes their work of art. And so for us, it was a great gift because as media artists, they're very, very good at documenting themselves, and that's part of a reason why they could have such resonance is that there is this sort of proliferation, documentation of their own activity. And in a way that was, especially in Russia and in a lot of these other places, that's why social media and all these things becomes an alternative public sphere for that kind of dialogue and so I think that it's an incredibly important aspect of it.
I'm actually developing a film at the moment about online fascism and Facebook fascism because, I mean, for instance, in England we have this EDL, English Defence League, who have hundreds of thousands of followers. They have protests and maybe 20 people turn up in the street and you think, oh, well, that's good, nobody's really into, but it's not where it's at anymore. The communities are virtual and they are very much international. And I think it's something we need to understand more and come to terms with more. And in terms of Pussy Riot, again, as you say, 2 million or more people saw this protest. You're not going to get 2 million people turning up to protest, but they can partake in these oppositionist or these movements, online, and that's a good thing and also a terrifying thing because it's very impossible to control and monitor. And as you're saying before about these comments you get online, I mean, people say things, in chat rooms and in comments that they would be arrested for if they said them in public. So there's this very uncontrolled sphere that is growing clearly, and it's already huge, where people can, indulge in hate crime, indulge in very dangerous political talk that is very, can have a huge influence on, a younger generation. So it's a scary time, I think, and as I say, when it's Pussy Riot doing it, it's great, but when others, not so great.
But I mean, this is perhaps a bit banal, but there's this sort of interesting schism that happens, and I think in many countries right now between generations that watch and don't watch television, and I think that a lot of the political, and in a way, I think that the conservative elements haven't been very successful in utilizing this new media and figuring out how to use it. But in Russia, we get a lot of questions about freedom of the press and whether you can say this or that, and people a lot of times don't realize that what's problematic and in Putin's Russia about the use of the media is that by investing and controlling the political message of 2 or 3 channels, you can guarantee yourself electoral victory because of basically old people and a certain kind of a slice of a demographic pie that watches those channels. You don't actually, in the new model, you don't really have to be totalitarian about newspapers, about the internet, about all these things. But that's changing because obviously that population is dying out. I think you see that all over the world, and so that the new generation isn't watching television, but they're inventing content through
or buying newspapers, or this is a very fast-moving and radical moment that, as ever, throws up great things and terrifying things. So it's what it's good to make films about. In a way, and I think the state of documentary and the rise of documentary, and indeed the distribution of documentary again, is all in flux and will, I think, benefit greatly from this online model and distribution online. As I say, people are not watching these films on television. They're not necessarily going to theatres to watch them, but they're watching them on their iPads and their phones and whatever. And I think there's a huge appetite and great audience for these films and the ways in which they're made. I mean, again, this film was made largely. Couldn't have made this film without the internet. I mean, it would have been impossible. So it's allowing new films to be made anywhere in the world at any moment. It's an extraordinary moment.
No, I mean, the retrievability of media. I mean, I think a lot of people talk about this as big data. I think that, to my mind, that's the big. I often like to say that right now is the golden age of documentary, and I think that that's the main reason for it. Is that it is this kind of archive culture of endlessly retrievable past. And that's a great, I think that's a great boon for documentary filmmaking.
You can, you could go online, you could sit in a room and you can make a film about anything just by downloading material from YouTube. And a lot of people are doing that. So you don't have to leave your room, you don't have to pay a penny. You just find material, weave it into a film, bingo. I mean, that's mind-blowing, and of course great people are doing it. Lots of bad, untalented people are doing it as well, but that doesn't matter. The good stuff will out, and you take a camera like that, $2,000 camera or something, you go and make an Oscar-winning movie. I mean, it's So it is. I think it's more than a golden age. I think it's a platinum age. Or, I mean, it's beyond that.
Right.
The possibilities are just extraordinary, and you know,
the platinum age will be when we all have retinal implants, and then it will just be all.
That what you mean next year? You mean?
Yeah.
I mean, this is all. The pace of it is extraordinary. I mean, you know, I have been in film and television for a couple of decades, and it's in the last 2 or 3 years, I think, and even right now, what's happening is absolutely beyond anything that's ever happened before. Right. So it's good stuff, and something like Hot Docs is, obviously played a huge role in it, in a way, and the festival circuit, the online community for all this stuff is growing exponentially, and very rapidly. So
It's great that Hot Doc does this thing about letting students in for free to screenings, because what you do notice at festivals and documentary festivals is that the crowds, like not the industry, not the filmmakers, but the crowds that come do tend to be a little bit older. A lot of times that will come out to the movie theaters, especially for documentaries, and I think that because that landscape is changing, and it's really, I think, important in terms of just catalyzing younger people to make films and to see what can be done to kind of get them into theaters. Because also experiencing it in the theater is more.
Oh, of course,
yeah.
It's a great experience, and we're having fantastic screenings here. And audiences are really quite, I think, the best we've seen actually, in many ways. So.
Well, and part of what I like about this documentary too is, as you're saying, it's new media, it's mixed media. There's YouTube, there's footage you shot, and then there's also this courtroom footage. And I was wondering if you can just talk more about how that I know you mentioned that you somehow managed to get it. It's so powerful though.
Well, it's it was one of those things where being in the courtroom, we knew that there are certain things that were recorded, and we had no idea. And so we knew that parts of it, at least parts of his speeches, we would be able to put in the film, and that would be significant. The two big surprises were, first, that we found, the speeches that the women made and their own statements in the court were so powerful and helped explain so much. And for us, it was the main goal in the film, but the kind of the nucleus of it was that tried to let them tell the story as much as possible, and that's why it doesn't. You don't need another perspective on Russia or on women or anything else. Like we felt that they did a really great job of getting their ideas across through in the ways that they wanted to. So that was the first surprise, and the second surprise was that when I contacted the Reuters agency and I started looking at the rushes, we realized that the cameramen, even though their job is basically to press a button on something like this, first of all began rolling on the cameras several hours before the proceedings started, and then they were also had microphones in there, so they were able to really film to give this intimate access to the women. And I remember calling up Mike, and when I first got the lower res DVDs of all that footage to use, and I was like, oh well, we have a film, and it's just it was this total 180 that
But again, it's also a reflection on the online age, because the reason they filmed this stuff was to stream it. Really, they weren't. They wouldn't have filmed 40 hours of courtroom to put in any kind of TV film or anything like that. So they just happened to be streaming it, and
we should say also that the footage that we use, most of it was never streamed. It was never seen.
Exactly, and a lot of it even wasn't. But the reason for filming it was for that, and that was a decision really by the government to say, look how open we are. We've got nothing to hide, and we're happy to, because they don't stream most trials. It's only, in fact, very few. I don't know if there have been any other major trials.
Women requested, there was early on there was a motion, so the women requested that the trial
but the state had to approve it. It was a bit, what the women want and what what the state wants doesn't necessarily say, but it did happen to be the same thing again. It was a great decision. We owe the Kremlin a great deal of thanks for doing that, because they've given us this incredible material, which I think historically it's like the trial of Joan of Arc being filmed or something, or the Dreyfus affair or something. It really, I think it is on that level. I think it's just, however absurd the incident is in many ways, the nature of the moment is really, I think, historically incredibly important. And
well, actually, the absurdity of the incident makes it a pure story.
Yeah.
That's what's
yeah.
brilliant
There's no moral ambiguity about what they did being a criminal act or not. I mean, I don't think there's any sane person in the world would seriously suggest that what they did was worthy of criminal offence.
Lots of people in the world that
people that get paid to do it. Yeah, but even people that think what they did was wrong would assume that they were being done under some kind of blasphemy law or some kind of I mean, actually, legalistically, and of course they do justify this. I mean, that was the whole point of the trial was to. But I don't think even the people participating in the from the prosecution actually fundamentally believe that what they're doing was reasonable. I think it was done because they're being paid to do that. They're being paid to get one result, and that's it. And I mean, the fact is that 99% of trial of people that go to trial in Russia are found guilty. So there was
not 99, but
a very high percentage.
Very high percentage.
98%. Sorry, I mean, in this country, in America, it's 87%. So we shouldn't feel too kind of comfortable about. I don't know in Canada what the statistic is, but it'd be interesting to know. It's very high. I mean, by the time you've got to trial, you're dead, really. In most cases, and unless you've got a lot of money to pay very expensive lawyers that may get you out of these things, most people don't. And so once you're caught up in the system, you're shafted.
And this is alluded to in the documentary as well, the comparisons with the show trials of the 1930s as well. Which was
and I think that's almost a more, it's, in addition to kind of illegal dynamics, it's this idea, and going back to this, I think that there are actually a lot of people in the world, probably more than half of the world, that believes that things like this and that sort of blasphemy is something that should be criminally punished and that social order should be enforced like this. I think that unfortunately that's the age of extremes that we live in, I think. And I think that specifically in post-Soviet countries, there is this long tradition of these public spankings, of punishing people that step out of line. And I think that that's really the tradition. It's less even about the charges. It's less about, it's more about this idea that, there's an idiom about a nail sticking out and getting the hammer. It's the opposite of the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Anyway, there is this
the hanging nail gets the hammer.
Gets the hammer, exactly. And I think that's really the resonance with the show trials and other things, that was a culture that began at that time and continued of really cracking down and telling people not to step out of line. So.
And there's something nice about the footage then being technically state-owned, I suppose, then being switched on its head. It's like making a film out of closed circuit films or something like that. Yeah.
Well, it's not exactly, because they're actually an independent company, so it's a Reuters kind of company, right. But still, yeah. But there is, yeah.
No, it is an incredible stroke of luck, really, that all this happened, and for them, I mean, again, it's all, as I said before, in a way, the trial is a performance, and guess what? This performance is being filmed, and guess what? People are making it into a film, and audiences are going to see it. I mean, it's just when you sort of reverse engineer what's happened. It's
rarely
really
do you get a chance to kind of immemorialize something.
Well, it's interesting too with performance art, which is supposed to often thought of as ephemeral and supposed to just pass and go and that's it.
Right, that's
and then now, especially, you sometimes don't know what's being recorded either. That even if your artist intent is to have that moment just be and then be gone, someone could be capturing on a camera. But so that's all changing as well.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing is that in what I mentioned earlier is that they're media performance artists, and that's the new dimension that they bring to it. Is that it's because of the availability of cheap recording equipment and all these things, it's no longer the kind of thing that it's difficult to document. And so for them, it's actually documenting also the responses that they get on the spot. Yeah. So it is a less ephemeral and more viral and more disseminated version of performance art.
Right. And so as much as this is also a portrait of these three women, it's also a portrait of Russia in a very scathing way. I think is easy to say, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the choices and how you wanted to represent a whole country as well.
Well, I mean, I think that I don't actually quite agree that necessarily a scathing portrait of Russia. I actually, in a way, I think that it shows certain things about. I think it's a more, dare I say, correct version of representing the story. And I think that it's, rather than seeing the whole story as kind of this orchestrated thing from in the judicial structure, in the way that and draconian tendencies in that. I think that that's important to highlight and to show that those parts of it. But I think at the same time, we hope that the film. First of all, I think that for Russians, I really want them to see that these women are sort of patriots, and they're very, they're courageous, and they're idealistic, and they're trying to change things for the better. And then I think that, so
I think the film in some ways is a psychoanalysis of the society, and you're seeing there's this event, it causes this reaction, what is causing those reactions, and I think we try and delve into the psyche of those for and against. In a way, the whole story is about misunderstanding and Pussy Riot not quite comprehending the degree of offence that they caused unwittingly. The opposition, the Orthodox Church being over-offended by something that wasn't intended to be a direct attack on their religiosity. It was a political statement.
And using it to promote kind of anti-extremism kind of
thing. And so all around, and we're digging into, this, as I say, this history of show trials, this relationship between church and state, which of course, under the Soviet system, the church was, the marginalized and repressed. Mm-hmm. And so this is, again, they call them Bolsheviks in their attack. They say this is a return to Bolshevism and attack on the church, which isn't the case. So it's as I say, we try and analyze, if you like, or give reasons, motivating reasons behind this reaction, which we do a bit. We try.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of one of the things that, for example, Katya from who's one of the members of the group likes about the film is she likes that there are other aspect of the movie, for example, prosecution lawyers, and I think that they even respect. So at one point in the film, a prosecution lawyer says that the story has done tremendous damage to liberalism in Russia, in a way, and I think that she respects that, and I think that it's an interesting position. I think a lot of people that are maybe sympathetic with them on certain political grounds are really off-put by what they did. I think that those things are really important to engage in as well. And I think that also the film kind of is, because they are provocative, and I think that they also, as our experience with the Q&A has been, that they also force people to consider their own societies and how, one of our favorite examples is, there's this graphic orgy in the movie, and it's really hard to imagine any Western society where you wouldn't go to jail for that, and they would get a fine for that. Whereas, going into a church is a different scenario, and in almost no Western country you would probably go to jail for that. But so I think that it's important to reflect on those different standards, and there are different reasons for why certain things will set off the government or set off the kind of national reactions and not others.
Yeah.
So.
And I should clarify, scathing in terms of the state as it is, but as a portrait of Russia itself, it actually delves quite into these sort of schisms of what is
I think
in
we're
the
quite
society
affectionate
now.
to most people.
Yes, no, that's that's why I should have scathing of the state, but not of the people in any way, because there. And I read another interview where you said you wanted to make sure that there wasn't any kind of stereotypes or caricatures of what Russians are, and I think that would be a difficult thing to negotiate when you're talking with the carriers of the cross, which is it's a chilling scene. And I wanted to, if you could speak a bit about that.
Wait, what about the carriers of the cross?
Well, it's a moment where that if you were to be, laying judgment on another aspect of society, that would be when it came down. Yeah. That these men are, their hatred's almost,
I mean, obviously we are editing what they say.
Yeah,
in
they're
that
really
way.
not that hateful. They're really nice.
I mean, we cut them for comedic value more than anything.
Oh, okay.
I mean, and whilst we obviously don't agree with them, I don't think we're trying to humiliate them or it's definitely not the intention. But it's to understand this depth of feeling, this rise of orthodoxy. I mean, as you have in Islamic world and the Christian world and the Jewish world, you have, we have seen in the last 20 years or so an incredible explosion in ultra-religious feeling around the world, and Russia is no different. And so it's, we wanted to convey that exists.
And I mean, what's it is, the way in which Russia is different in this way is that these religious people, and I think that Pussy Riot actually is very significant for them, and as well, that these people that have been kind of marginalized and silenced for a long time, all of a sudden, granted through a catalyst that's a bit bizarre and strange, have this voice, and they themselves become radicalized and much more active in a way that they've never done before, or they've never done since, in over 100 years. And so I think that at least people like Vicari, for me, what was so attractive about them is the sheer theatricality of it, is that it is also, the closest thing I can think of is that they're almost like Civil War reenactors in the West, in the US, and that it is a form of performance. And one of the things we say is what I think I mentioned during the Q&A is that one of the darlings that we have to kill in this film is a scene where the carriers of the cross sacrifice this Madonna poster and burn it and describe how the demon is trying to escape from the poster. And that is also a form of performance, and the fact that they do this for television, they do this for the cameras, and they do this in a way, it's a form of activity that's really not unlike Pussy Riot. It's coming from a totally different ideological position, but it's this idea that you're performing your own beliefs, and it's a form of direct action as well.
I mean, this controversy was definitely stoked up and hyped up by the church, by Kirill, by the patriarch. I mean, if he'd have come out and said, okay, it was a very bad thing he done, but okay, let's try and understand them and be forgiving, then that would have been that. The fact is, he very much was behind that, caused this prayer meeting, is one of the key figures behind, stoking this story up and whipping people up into this outrage, this moral outrage that they then felt because I think he had a big control over.
No, I think that that's been one of the misunderstandings. I think is that Kirill is much more responsible and involved and much more of a catalyst than Putin. I think it is one of those things that, I don't know this for certain, I don't think anyone does, but I think that there was enough of a will from the church and for them to be prosecuted, and Putin was probably all too happy about it, but he didn't have to get involved because obviously he didn't like their other actions and their other performances. So he could have stopped it, but there's... And
it's important to explain the relationship between Kirill and Putin. I mean, Kirill described Putin's return to power as a miracle, and that it's a kind of religious duty to vote for him. So there is a deal going on there, and so Putin kind of owes Kirill for massive, I don't know what numbers in terms of votes that come from the Orthodox community, but they're very significant, and certainly a lack of them would put Putin in balance of power in question. So it was a no-brainer for him to sort of go along with this, because and certainly the Western reaction is something he's always batted away anyway. I mean, if Bono or Madonna are critical, what does he care? In fact, he's
right to actually point out that there is a huge double standard in dealing with these things,
exactly.
And I think that's, and in a way, by not appreciating that double standard, we almost do a disservice to the situation in the country, because people there that are, let's say, supporters that are more on the fence about the whole situation, when they see this kind of reaction that is misguided and it isn't directed towards the actual cause, all it does is cause people to stop listening to what's being said, in the West.
I know you said you wanted this to be the definitive Pussy Riot film at the beginning, but wondering how when you were making it, did you have any sense of how it would fit into this narrative, or was it all just moving to the Pussy Riot narrative, which is, I think it's fair to call it that at this point. Yeah.
Well, we had a hunch. We had a hunch, definitely, from the very first moment you see these images of this group in Red Square or whatever. You're thinking this is such a dynamic clash, that it's bound to produce sparks that will perhaps ignite, and it did. So we definitely, it felt like it always had the potential to be that, and in a way, have we been surprised at how big it is? Well, only just, in a way. As I say, I think, and I do think it's even bigger than actually we even perceive it at the moment. I think in time, of course that's speculative, but I think in time it is like a Dreyfus affair. one. Well, it in its way, I think it will be. It's got that potential. It's certainly more people know about Pussy Riot than Dreyfus now, and anyway, and we'll see in time. What the consequences of that moment, and I mean, to me, the action is the trial. To me, that's the big historic moment that they make this, confer on this action the status of a social crime, of a revolutionary act that has to be punished by imprisonment. That's what's. I mean, they give them that. They make it into this. I mean, if they batted it away as naughty students just making a fuss, then that would have been this wiser thing to do, really, because now they have built this thing into a seismic moment in Russian politics, essentially. So.
For me, I find hate crime legislation really interesting, and when it's applied and how it's applied and everything, and what they're charged with. Ultimately, even that article that they're charged with is a hate crime article, and it's there, and it's usually prosecuted for hate crimes. The fact that they try to make this into a hate crime is fascinating, because clearly the women didn't have any hatred towards religious people. That's easy to document, but whether their lack of consideration qualifies as hatred, I think it's for a lot of people, I think it's legalistically quite interesting. I think that it's obviously, given that Russia has a secular constitution, there's no way that what they did should qualify as that. But in terms of what is punished in terms of offense to religious people, and I think that in that way it really evokes a lot of questions that are brought up with, let's say, even that Innocence of Muslims video, and a lot of, in general, how we deal with religious sensitivity all over the world, and what is actually, for people who are citizens of a secular government, what is their responsibility towards,
freedom of expression.
Towards freedom of expression, and also towards sort of the right of others to
not be offended.
And would you ever revisit the, upon their release? Is there something?
Sure. Absolutely. The second wave of the revolution would be something to document. Yeah, no, we hope to. I mean, we hope upon their release they like the film enough to want to continue working with us.
Perfect. I think we'll
thanks a lot.
There. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sorry I wasted time at the beginning chatting about the Battersea Museum. I didn't know we were rolling.
As I say, you can make an alternative show out of that. Toronto's architectural value.